Well, Old Roller Nation, welcome to the show. Brandon, the Wolverine Mullins. Some of you probably fairly familiar with him from Stephen Kesting's work, the Nonstop DVD series. And he's a third-degree black belt, trains down in Houston, Texas, I believe with Draculino, if I'm not mistaken. Super excited to have you. As I was telling you before the show, the butterfly guard portion of your DVD has been a big help to me. I've gotten a lot out of it, and my butterfly guard is still bad. So if you we rolled and it wasn't very good, I don't want you to think you did a bad job. That's on me. But I'm working on it. And one of the things that I really liked out of that was a significant portion of that butterfly guard theory comes out of the technical stand-up, where anytime your opponent gives you the opportunity to get out of guard, stand up and do it. There's an opportunity there. So really excited to have you on the show, Brandon. Welcome. I don't know where I was going with that, but I was going to say welcome and glad to have you, and I kind of stumbled on it.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So obviously I'm talking a little fast for Kentucky folk. I got jacked on pre-workout earlier, so you're going to have to forgive me. I may crash about halfway through this. I was doing my run, and been trying to do a 3-mile run twice a week, and it's a little bit tough on my knees as I get a little bit older. So I gotta psych myself up for it.
Do 2 miles.
Screw that.
That's all I ever do, man. I do 2 miles most of the time, and then every now and then I'll do 3 miles because it hurts. Doesn't really hurt my knees. It hurts my ankles and my hips.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, my problem is, and it's going away, but when I started this back in May, I had a little bit more of we'll say a gas tank for a love machine. Some might call it a beer gut.
Yeah.
And so I'm working that away, and that's actually really been a big help, is that I'm not carrying as much weight. But from the strength conditioning side, I've tried to put a bigger effort into the cardiovascular conditioning. And especially after some of my talks with Stefan, because he's been really influential to me on the concept of endurance. But enough about anybody other than you. This is your show. I wanted to ask you to give you the rundown on what the Old Rollers podcast is about. I started this show just before my 40th birthday. Recently turned 40 in June, and
we're the same age.
Hey, all right.
I'm older than you.
you look like 15 years younger than me, you son of a bitch.
You get to. Young.
I'm doing it too. I guess I'm not.
Living in a pure heart keeps me young.
Pure heart. You don't look like the pure heart type. I'm just going to toss that out.
I'm pure.
All right. Well, I'm not going to argue with you. I'll accept it. It's a show. But my goal, as I have fallen in love with this sport, with this hobby, with this lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, is to be able to do it as well as I can for as long as I can. And so the show is kind of divided between skill development, physical therapy and strength and conditioning side, how do we extend our athletic capacity, into our, sort of youth impaired age. And then nutritionally as well, what things can we do to maybe slow the process of aging? So there's a few things going on all simultaneously. And you were recommended to the show by Stefan from a previous interview. And he said that it would be interesting to get your perspective on some of these topics because you're a smaller guy. He said you weigh 145 or maybe even less.
Yeah, but I actually weighed myself tonight, and I was 137.
Okay, so in the 130s, and so there could be son. I'm busy right now, so please let me do the show. Family. But what he was saying was that without a size advantage, you have to maximize leverage. And as we get older, there may be some loss of muscle mass, there may be some loss of speed or athleticism. we have to maximize leverage and timing in order to be at the right place to have the most leverage at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said you would have some ideas on, maybe some things that we could do along those lines. And I'm really excited to get that from you because, like I said, you've already helped my game out, and I think that you got a lot to offer as well on other topics.
Well, I don't know where you want to start, but I mean, here's the good news and the bad news. You know what I mean? Like, you really got to get a couple of things in your brain, and I don't just mean you, but I mean everybody out there. Really, at any level, when you're starting to train, you have to accept that there's hard work that needs to be done. You just got to put that on the table right away, right? It's not an escalator to success; it's a staircase. You got to climb it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So right away, you got to get ready for the hard work, right? You got to get ready for things to get tough. You just have to put that in the equation right away, right? Number two, and this is, it's very related. There's no shortcuts. So what I mean is this: you simply need to keep your eye on being technical and constantly refining what you're doing, always, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people have this idea that, let's say you have technique A and technique B, okay? So they think, well, technique A is superior to technique B, for whatever it is. If I learn technique B, I will be whatever, a world champion. If I learn technique A, I won't be. And that's not really the case in a big picture. Now, technique selection is important, but not, what I'm trying to say is there's no secret technique that's going to give you some sort of advantage over somebody else, right? Good jiu-jitsu is good jiu-jitsu, right? So the point of that is a lot of people will get off track and they'll waste a lot of time trying to find this secret technique that's going to give them this big advantage, and that doesn't really exist, Now, the type of technique selection that does matter is you need to think about, and you can work on this on your own. You can work on it with your instructor. You can ask people like me. You can email me or Facebook me or whatever. There is technique selection, right? And so when we pick out the techniques that we're gonna focus on, so of course your fundamentals are gonna be there. You can't get around that. If you can't do a technical stand-up, practice until you can. I don't care how long it takes you. If you can't do a shrimp, you got to practice until you can, because you're not really going to have technical jiu-jitsu without those fundamental movements and just basic fundamental techniques, right?
Mm-hmm.
But something about technique selection we do got to realize is we want to try to use techniques and positions that are going to age well, okay?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you a couple of examples, right? If you are starting and you're already older, a lot of times you'll have some physical limitations, right? Maybe you're not quite as flexible or as fast as the younger guys, right? But in my experience, people remain strong for a very long time. We have guys that train with us that are 60 and they're still super, super strong. So what you lose is some flexibility and you lose speed most of the time, but not so much strength. So you need to find positions where you can slow things down, right? So you want to focus on, let's say, half guard instead of spider guard, right? Even though spider guard, it's very useful, right? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't learn it, but maybe that's not your primary guard, because a person has a lot of movement. If you're on spider guard bottom trying to control your opponent, they can really move a lot. They can literally out hustle you. I mean, just watch any clip of Leandro Lowe passing somebody spider guard. I mean, he could just really out hustle people, right? The person on bottom, they don't win by slowing people down. they win by kind of a war of attrition and getting slick technically, right? In order to do that, you're going to have a certain range of flexibility. You're going to have a certain amount of grip and finger strength and conditioning, which we also can lose as we get older. I know that my fingers, they're not wrecked, but they're not the same as they were when I was younger. It's much harder for me to hold a grip than it used to be.
Sure.
So you got to start thinking about positions like that. You're going to have an easier time slowing somebody down, let's say in a nice tight half guard position, than you would in an open spider guard position, right? So it doesn't mean you shouldn't learn spider guard, but you should prioritize half guard over that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And maybe find a way when you find yourself in spider guard, you can move yourself into closed guard or half guard or butterfly guard. All those positions you have more control. The person, you're more stuck, if that makes sense. And if your opponent can't move, you can make it much more of a technical battle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can also look at it. We can look at technique selection from, let's say, from the perspective of like, what submission do I use, right? So let's say we're talking about 3 very basic submissions that most everybody knows. Arm lock from the closed guard, triangle from the guard, omoplata from the guard, okay?
Mm-hmm.
As somebody who's older, the best technique that you should, of those 3, the one you should prioritize is omoplata, right? Because you're least likely to get stacked up. Your neck is safer and your back is safer, right? When I put someone in a triangle, they can stack me. When I put somebody in a arm lock, they can stack me. I have problems with my neck and my back. When I do omoplata, I'm off to the side. They can jam me up, but they really can't stack me the same way they can with an arm lock or a triangle, right? So that's the kind of things we got to think about. You got to think about what positions can I use to slow people down, and I need to put some thought into techniques that will keep me safe, as in I'm not going to get injured applying them, right?
Yeah. I really like that concept too of you're looking at sort of the classic Gracie Triad, the triangle, armbar, and omoplata from a guard scenario, and saying not necessarily what's going to give me the highest finish rate, but what's going to give me the least risk to my body. And a lot of people will say that the omoplata, it's the one that most people, if they're being submitted, will try and give you. Like if someone's in a triangle, they're going to try and give you the omoplata.
That's true. But
because it's easier to escape. But as an older, and I like to use the term youth impaired, or we'll say some seasoned grappler. Yeah. Always getting to finish might actually be a mistake. And I can say, like, from listening to interviews with Ryan Hall, he was called the Ryangle, pretty good at triangles, and young and extremely flexible. He even said there was quite a few of them that I should have let go of.
That's right. Because
and so I really like that idea of having your technique selection based on outcomes, not necessarily in terms of like finish rate or like what can I get my opponent with, but what's going to be the least chance of me getting hurt, because the more days I'm on the mat, the more chance I have to get better.
That's right. And also, look, I mean, you said it very correctly. You said, like, if you present an experienced person with those 3 submissions, they're almost all going to pick the omoplata to defend. So as somebody who's trying to apply that works in your advantage. People are more likely to give it to you. You don't have to, the same way with half guard. If you try to pull everyone to close guard, they're going to put up a pretty reasonable amount of resistance, because they know if they get stuck there, they're stuck. However, most people will just give you half guard. They will not fight at all. So that's actually something we can use to our advantage, right? Now, in the beginning, you might not be where you need to be technically in order to take advantage of those kind of free gifts. But if you play them out, eventually you're going to be able to take advantage of that. And that leads me to something else we need to think about, which is we need to be, in terms of getting better as quickly as we can, it isn't about learning a specific technique. It's about breaking things down and getting things connected, right? So the way that we do that is we do a lot of positional training, like specific training, right? So let's just keep talking about half guard and omoplata, right? Let's say those were two things you wanted to focus on, right? And those would be two good techniques to use for youth impaired. So what you would do, let's say you were training 3 times a week, right? And let's just pretend you had full control over the kind of training you could do, right? What I would recommend is, let's say you're doing an hour-long session. The first half is technique, and the second half is going to be training, right? One of those classes, I would do 30 minutes of live training, broken up however you want to time-wise. Another, I would do only positional training. And then the third, I would do a mix of both, right? Or I would actually have 2 days of positional only and only 1 day of live. Now, let's be clear about what positional is. Let's say we're doing half guard. So what you could do is you would begin the round in half guard. The person on bottom has to pass the guard. Person on bottom's got to sweep or submit their partner. Person on top has to pass. If either person accomplishes the goal, you reset, right? And what you might want to do is, let's say you're going to do that for a whole class. That gets a little bit repetitive, so you want to change it a little. So maybe the first round, you start kind of in a neutral half guard, right? So nobody really has the advantage, right? And then the next round, you give the advantage to the guy on bottom. So he gets a deep underhook. He blocks the crossface. He's in a great position. Go from there. And then the third round, maybe you give the advantage to the passer. So now he has a deep crossface and an underhook, and then we still go. So what happens is you really start to understand what's possible and what's not possible from the half guard. So when you find yourself there, even if it's in not the best position, you know what to do to work yourself into a better position and capitalize. And then the same thing with the omoplata, right? You would actually want to do some training where you just start in the omoplata already, and your job is to finish. Your opponent's job is to escape. So you can build up a lot of time learning how to follow and make adjustments with people trying to escape. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And then eventually you would want to make sure you can connect your half guard to your omoplata and then to the rest of your parts of your game, right? Because if we're only using let's say kind of a relatively small realm of techniques, we have to make sure that they're all connected, right? So in addition to drilling your half guard sweep 1, 2, and 3, and your omoplata set up 1, 2, and finish 1, 2, you need to make sure you can get to the omoplata from the half guard. And there's a number of ways to do that, right? A big problem that I see people have is their game is very disconnected. So they have two things they're very good at, but they're not able to actually put those things together. And that's something that I always worked on a lot when always. I would always try to link my big guns, if that makes sense. Yeah. You know, I was good at, I liked triangle also. I liked X guard. I liked butterfly. I liked closed guard a lot. So I could hit arm drag. I liked a lot. Low single leg. I could hit all of those big guns on my right and my left side. X guard too, if I didn't mention that. And then I could get into all of I could get into a triangle from all those positions, and I could transition from one position to the other in a smooth way. So once I kind of got into the system, it was hard for people to get out of it. I just went way up. Does that make sense?
It does. Yep. And I something that really kind of set off a trigger in me there when you were talking, and I'm not triggered. I'm saying it blinked a light bulb. Is you were saying that having your different systems connect, or building connections between them. On a previous interview, we had Rob Bernanke, and that interview was about curriculum development and what makes a white belt, what makes a blue belt, what makes a purple belt. And he said, basically, if we're talking about just purely guard play, then as a blue belt, he needs to see, I think it's maybe 2 guards that you're pretty good with. And then purple, it needs to be 3. And brown, it needs to be 4. And he goes, they don't have to connect. He goes, you'll still be that rank to me if you have them and you can execute them, at brown belt level or whatever. But it is very helpful if they do. So if 2 guards don't connect well, then you're going to have to build an intermediate system that goes in between them. So I kind of liked what you said there, where you would look at your butterfly, you would look at your triangle, you would look at your closed guard, and you would say, how can I get between these in a way that is fluid, where my opponent is never out of it? They may be out of the closed guard, but now they're in butterfly, and I'm still fighting for the triangle, and I still have a setup for it. And my dogs are really excited for the Wolverine. I don't know what's going on. Hey, guys.
Don't worry.
Would you shut up?
I have that effect on people and dogs.
Yeah, and my wife got this freaking hound dog. So his name is Fox, because like Fox the Hound, like the Fox the Hound. I mean, I don't know who name. This is embarrassing. But this guy has the loudest voice that you have ever. I mean, like if he barks on one side of the house, it shakes the windows on the other side. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's been a real problem. So for my old rollers out there, you're gonna have to forgive Fox's. I guess I don't know. It's 10 p.m. tonight, so he's getting ready for bed and trying to burn all the energy out. So professional of me, yeah. I'm a white belt. I'm a white belt podcaster.
Yeah.
I can't get my wife and kids on board with like making dogs be quiet for me. I don't know what's going on. I got to get a separate studio for this, and then I'll just move there and just some mats. Yeah, like one of those 25-year-old blue belts who, like they live in the gym and sleep on an air mattress. I'll do that. That should work.
Good. I got mats in my living room.
Yeah, I have some mats in the garage, and they're pretty nice. Actually, they were the really cheap Amazon ones, but they turned out pretty well. So to kind of move on, let's talk about, because I really like what you're talking about with situational training and positional sparring, and that's been huge. It's been a huge theme across the board for a lot of people, is develop skills in certain domains where you're really, really good there, and then connect those domains. And suddenly you have a jiu-jitsu game. It's not.
Well, one thing that like I've talked about this before, but like you're constantly working and refining 2 systems at the same time in jiu-jitsu, like general and specific, right? So general is just jiu-jitsu as a whole. It includes everything: attacking, defense, passing, takedowns, everything, right? So your job is to constantly refine the whole, all of jiu-jitsu, right, that you take in. You got to just always be trying to get better and better and better and better, right? Now, you also have specific, which is that's where you want to make your mark on the jiu-jitsu world. You want, when people think about you want them to think about this, this, and this, right? You got to pick those things out. You know what I mean? If you get into a fight to the death, what submission are you going to that's going to work, right? So you want to have those big guns. You want to have those things that you can really shake up the world with. And this is how you put those 2 systems together. Your general jiu-jitsu has to be good enough to get people into the specific jiu-jitsu. And then if you get taken out, again, you got to be able to survive long enough in a position you're not comfortable within to get back into that specific realm that you like. And over time, you're pretty good everywhere, right? I mean, you look at people that are really, really good, even though in a competition. One interesting thing to do is watch people compete and watch them train. And that will give you a much better idea of how good they are, right? If you watch somebody, I mean, whoever is one of your favorite people in jiu-jitsu, if you watch them compete, you'll see them use a relatively small number of techniques, really, right? But if you're able to watch some extended time of them training, what you'll see is like a whole new level of stuff that they actually can do, because they're training with people who know their style, and those people can take them out of their system. And you'll get to see a lot of their other jiu-jitsu, that general jiu-jitsu they have, in order to put people back into that specific situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's you can kind of use that concept in a lot of different ways. You know, I was teaching a private lesson the other day, and, you know, I was talking to a guy, and he had, you know, one technique that he really liked and that we were trying to build on. And I said, look, first of all, you got to think like this. When you get into a position where you don't know what to do, there's two options. You could learn a new technique for that position, okay? Or you could learn how to simply transition into a position that you are comfortable with. That's easy, especially in the beginning. Now, over time, you might develop a new technique or learn a new technique. But a lot of times, the answer is much more simple. You don't need to learn a whole new thing. Just learn how to get yourself back on track. You know what I mean? If you got lost, you know, if you got lost somewhere, the first thing you do is look for a landmark, right? As a man. I don't know if women do that. Men do that, right? So we look for a landmark so we can get orientated, and then we can get back on track, right? Well, you need to do the same thing in your jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean? Like, you're still on the ground. It's not that unfamiliar. You know what I mean? Like, you're still doing jiu-jitsu. So I know that you encounter some awkward positions, but instead of trying to freestyle, just try to find your way. See how you can move your body to get back into a position that's more familiar with you, even if it's a bad one, like side control bottom. At least you'll know what to do. You'll avoid injury that way because you won't move in an awkward way, and you'll get kind of a reset. You know, so that's another way you can kind of look at that general and specific as well.
You know, from my own experience, and, you know, anybody who's a fan of the show knows I'm just, you know, a purple belt, and I'm certainly not a world-beating purple belt. But I had a real hard time with guard retention and guard recovery for a long time. And I'm still not great at it. That's probably the weakest area of my game. And I'm working hard on it, but it's taking time. But something that I learned was that in the beginning, I had to accept that I was going to get my guard passed a lot, and I was going to be, you know, basically fighting off submissions. And I learned to feel really comfortable with, what is it going on? Guys, enough. Giving the near side arm. If someone got like a far side arm, they would, you know, immediately transition to like far side arm bars or Kimuras. It was really tough for me to get out of that. But the near side arm was a little bit more difficult for someone to submit me. Typically, it would be I would be offering them either a near side arm lock or a arm triangle.
Yeah.
Hey, Kelsey, can you get these animals? Kelsey is my wife, and I don't think she's gonna listen. Hey, look at that. She did. All right. We got lucky. But learning to escape that near side arm bar and arm triangle and come to a top position was easier for me because I was there more often, but it was just easier than guard retention. And so in the beginning, I found that my guard retention strategy was give the near side arm as someone passes my guard so that when they take it, I can, you know, kind of spin out and potentially even change positions. Now, is that a long-term healthy strategy? No, I'm not even trying to pretend that it was.
Like you said.
It worked it worked in the beginning because it was much harder to develop guard retention because my hip movement was so bad. So
it's mentally easier as well, because either you get submitted or you escape right then. You don't have to get crushed and squished or whatever. So you either get out in one big movement or you get submitted in one big movement and it's over, which is, it's easier to deal with mentally. And I've done that too. I know the feeling, especially, you know, when I was a lower belt also. It's kind of like all or nothing. But as you said, it's not a long-term strategy.
No, and I'm not trying to espouse that as like, okay, this is what you got to do, guys. Like, forget the guard. Just like get good at escaping one submission and make sure people take it. No. That's not the point. But I liked what you said about, you know, whenever you're put in a place where you're not good and you're taken out of a comfortable position, you're then posed with a choice, which is I can either deal with this new position, or I can figure out a way to get back to where I'm comfortable. And initially, getting back to where you're comfortable is probably the less complex strategy or tactic.
You know, I recently went back to school for engineering, and I recently graduated. And one thing that I realized,
congratulations, that's huge.
Thank you. When you know, you got to do a lot of math and stuff. And I would take these like calculus classes and these like differential equations, which is like real high level math stuff. And I would probably 70% of the time, the way that you solve these problems is you turn them into algebra problems and then you solve that. You don't actually do calculus or the differential equation. Sometimes you do, but a lot of times what you really do is you transform it into something else through some mathematical methods, and then you solve a problem that everyone knows how to solve. And we do that same thing in jiu-jitsu, and actually that sort of idea of transformation happens in all kinds of different fields, you know? One thing you might want to think about with guard recovery that might help you is a guard recovery is a positional escape that hasn't happened yet. That's really what it is, right? So think about how you recover guard from side control, right? Like you bump, you slide the knee in, you recover, right?
Yeah.
Well, what would happen if you applied that technique before the guy was actually solid on top of you, right? Like if you walked it back a half a second and then a half a second and a half a second, that's all guard recovery is for the most part. You're applying the escape before the person solidifies. So you're bringing your legs in place before the person actually gets solid on you. So maybe that's a way you can think about it. You know, start off by drilling your side control escape a lot. Like get those reps way up and do lots of positional training in side control. And I think what you'll find is if you put that in your mind that guard recovery is a positional escape that hasn't happened yet, it might make things easier for you, right?
Yeah.
I do that. It helps. That's how I think about it, basically.
Well, I like that concept because I tend to have a guard that goes from either very attack style or I'm in side control. So I have really good frontline attacks from a lot of different ranges, but if I miss, then I tend to get past. And so my guard recovery, and I'm not saying like, you know, chumps do that. I'm saying like, but you know, if I'm going against somebody that's at my level, I'm going to win the guard battle or I'm probably going to lose it and have a hard time getting it back. And I'm pretty good with escapes. I feel confident there, but the recovery element, I don't think that I'm maybe tripping that trigger early enough. I think that might be the thing that I'm missing is the sense of, okay, I'm not playing guard anymore. Now I'm escaping as it's happening as opposed to after it's happened.
Man, you know, we got to be poker players. We have to analyze the odds, right? So think about professional poker. When if you're playing No Limit Texas Hold'em, right? I don't know if they're playing Kentucky. That's what we play here, okay? When they put the flop out, right? You get 2 cards, I get 2 cards, and they lay 3 cards down, okay? So your job as a pro player is to make the best bet for the cards that are on the table right now. You're not, I mean, okay, this is a big picture. Like, depending on what you get, you might play it differently. But in general, that's the strategy. So if you got two aces, right, you're going to assume that you have the best hand, and you're going to bet accordingly, right? And if I got whatever, like some low card offsuit trash, I'm going to assume I have the worst hand. You know what I mean? I might check or something like that. So you play accordingly. But now, if another card is dealt, everything changes. Like, the odds are totally different now. You could have been winning, like, if we would have went to the end right then, you would have won. The fourth card comes down, it's all different now. Maybe now I got a straight or something. Does that make sense?
It does.
So you got to do that same thing in terms of your guard, right? As the person starts making moves, you got to evaluate that situation like on a half a second by half a second basis, right? You know, can I recover? No. Can I downgrade without losing my guard entirely, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm in the closed guard. Can I recover a half guard situation or a butterfly situation, right? So you got to kind of maybe do like a tactical retreat will save you instead of trying to recover the position that you previously had, let's say closed guard. So even though you couldn't get back to closed guard, you can get back to half guard in a good position, and then you can be still offensive. Something people forget about too is, and I'm not familiar with the curriculum that you have at your school, but I think this will probably apply. We teach two main escapes from side control. One is recovering the guard, and the other is turning to our knees and kind of doing a double leg, right? Mm-hmm. Even though lots of things happen off of that. But sure. you get head to head like this, right? Well, if we kind of bring it back to what I mentioned before about a guard recovery as a positional escape that hasn't happened yet, you got to think like that too. So typically when somebody starts to pass, you're going to try to throw your outside leg over. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Now, what happens to most people is if they can't do that, they simply push, and they keep trying. But recovering the guard isn't the only escape from side control. So if your legs can't go over, you can belly down and go for like a double leg type position. Mm-hmm. And in my experience, a lot of people don't utilize that. They simply keep trying to do the guard, the kind of the guard recovery instead of bellying down. If you can get onto a single or a double, you don't have to finish it. You can pull yourself back into guard there. You don't got to take them down. You know what I mean? If I get a hold of a single leg, it's very easy for me to sit into half guard. If I get into close guard and the guy sprawls on me, you actually see this in MMA all the time. You see it in jiu-jitsu too. But a guy will shoot, the guy will sprawl really hard, and they'll pull into like butterfly guard, right? With like double underhooks. It's like a good position.
Yeah.
So a lot of times people, all they see in terms of guard recovery is like fancy inversions and stuff like that. That has a place in jiu-jitsu 100%, but I don't know that if it's mandatory for everybody. Really, I don't. I invert when I need to, but I was never like king of inversions. You know what I mean? Like I never liked being stacked up and squished.
Right.
So I think you need the basic like leg over recovery, but don't forget about turning in and getting onto singles and doubles. And then you can wrestle out of there, or you can simply pull the person back into your guard, right?
I like that concept of hybridizing with wrestling, where you're wrestling into position and then using that as a guard pull to recover.
Yeah.
I think that's very creative, and that's an element that I probably have been missing because I prefer to wrestle. Actually, I'm not when it comes to guard recovery.
Well, you got to take what's there, right? You don't get emotionally attached to one technique or the other. You got to take what's there. right? I mean, if the double is there, take it. If the guard pull is there, you take it. People can defend one thing very well. They cannot defend multitasking is a myth. Okay, you could do one thing really well, or you can do two things like shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sorry, but can we say that?
Oh
I
yeah.
said it.
Fuck yeah.
Okay. But you know what I mean? So if you start giving your opponent more than one option, he cannot defend all of them, right? And the good news is you don't got to give him 100. You just got to give him 2, really. He's going to pick one to defend, and you go the other way. It's that simple.
Yeah, and I definitely think as we look at, a potential reduction in athleticism as we age, that systematizing and, having the 2 or 3 options there where you basically take what is given is long term in terms of our longevity. That's a much more valid strategy than trying to just fight for what might not be there, and then potentially risking injury or just long term wear and tear. That's a lot harder on the body.
Yeah, and you just really have to you have to accept that there's a lot of learning and a lot of refinement on the way. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times when I talk to beginner to mid-level people, they seem to have this idea of at some point they can stop learning and refining. Like, okay, I got that technique, I can forget about it now. And that's not the case. Like, you always need to be adding things on. Look, you got to do it at a digestible rate. You really can't learn. You can learn like one thing a week, really. I mean, maybe one technique that you're going to be able to digest and use it. So we got to realize there's kind of we're a little bit restricted with how long it's going to take us based on our input. However, if we focus and we work hard, we can learn it quick enough, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you always got to refine, always. You know what I mean? Like, if you've ever seen a professional sporting event, you know what I mean? Why are professional baseball players playing catch still? Why are professional basketball players that get paid millions of dollars still doing layups in the warm-up? They've done that millions of times. And the reason is because you have to always refine. You have to always stay sharp. So a lot of people have this idea of once they graduate from the fundamental class to the advanced class, they can just forget the fundamentals. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. You know what I mean? Like, the idea is you take what you learn and you build on that, right? And then you refine and learn more and refine and learn and refine. And so it's really a process, and it kind of goes back to what I said before. You have to get ready for the hard work. It's hard, it's difficult. And the sooner, I'm not saying that you don't do that or that people don't do that, but
you can say it. I don't do
that. But I mean, you really have to, you have to accept that it's going to be hard. It's going to get rough, but if you persevere through it, you'll make it, as long as you keep learning and keep refining, and you try to stay focused. I mean, I got beat up so much when I was younger, of course, when I was a lower belt, and I just always had this thing in my head. I would just tell myself, like, my time is going to come eventually. One day I'm going to be the guy dishing out the beatings instead of receiving them. And you know what? The day did come, and it will come for everybody if you stay on the path. You know what I mean? But
yeah,
you got to get ready for the hard work, and you got to keep learning and keep refining.
Well, I think that what you're saying there is a big part of why longevity is such a thing that I'm trying to focus on with this show, is that I'm left with a quote from Chris Howder, who was one of the Dirty Dozen, the first 12 American black belts, and he said that it's not who's best, it's who's left. And,
Yeah,
you
kind
know,
of. I mean,
I,
yeah.
I want to be who's left. And, you know, the first part of that is having a strategy and a thought process and an intentional mindset for longevity, like to stay in the game for a long time.
Yeah.
And you know, this is the other joke of the show, is that it doesn't matter what your age is. If you don't want to quit jiu-jitsu, then you are an old roller. Because if today you're 18, tomorrow you're a day older. And if you
Yeah.
keep going, you're older than you were. And that
You'll be that
means
old guy eventually.
it's going to come. So you got to have, you know, a thought process and a plan for how to deal with it. I think to a certain degree, jiu-jitsu will kind of tell you what's working and what isn't. Your partners are going to tell you what's working and what isn't by beating you with it. Uh,
Yes and
but
no.
but there's also just like you said, there's technique selection. You know, in terms of like choosing maybe the half guard versus spider guard, you know, based on speed changes and differences in attributes. So you know, that's a huge thing for me. I want to be one of the ones left, and it sounds like you're thinking along those lines as well.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I've always been undersized in the training room. I mean, most of the time I was the smallest person in the training room, or one of the smallest. Um, I I wouldn't consider myself unathletic. I think I'm relatively athletic,
Sure.
but I'm not athletic when you compare me against like real athletes. You know what I mean? I'm more athletic than maybe the average person, but not if you compare me to like really good, like I don't know, somebody like Homoloba Hall or Andre Galvao. Those guys are like crazy athletes, man. Like I don't have the same sort of strength or speed or explosiveness as they did. Even when I was younger, I didn't have that. So I always had to compensate with like technique and strategy and being consistent with my training, you know. And so I think that you just need to. I mean, it's a good attitude. You got to think about just if you stick with it, eventually you're going to be the one left who's going to be winning. You know.
Right. And it's not always going to be a pretty process. You know, like
Not.
there's, even as a fairly inexperienced purple belt, I can tell you that, you know, the shit train doesn't stop. You know, like when I was a white belt, a purple belt was like, you know, just like a freaking jujitsu genius to me.
Untouchable. They were
And,
untouchable.
and now I'm just a purple belt that's getting clubbed by like a baby seal occasionally by, you know, a white or a blue belt because I fucked up, you know, like
Yeah, yeah.
and made a mistake. That never happened to me though. I don't know why. Like as a white belt, I never did catch the guy making the mistake. I'm working on that.
Yeah, but I mean, it will. You'll catch a black belt or something or a brown belt, you know.
I'm coming for you.
But yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it will happen, you know. But it's just it's difficult, man. You know, something that really helped me out. If I don't know if your viewers are into doing any sort of like literature and researching and stuff like that, but there's a couple of things that helped me a lot. Um, I think he's Swedish. His name is K. Anders Ericsson. I think he passed away like within the last 5 years or something. But he was like a really really top researcher in skill acquisition and expert level performance, right?
Mhm.
And one of the things that he talked about was so there's a book called Outliers, which kind of
Mhm.
made a theory of it. He didn't really say this, and they kind of put it in his mouth, but it does apply. So in Outliers, they talk about the 10,000 hour rule, right? And basically, what the author of that book said was, within all this research, they never found somebody that was expert level that didn't put in 10,000 hours of practice, right? And
Yeah.
they never found somebody that put the practice in that wasn't expert level, right? So like when I heard that, and then I started going into this, I looked at like the notes and everything, and then I saw that this guy, K. Anders Ericsson, I started looking at his research and got into something called deliberate practice and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
To me, like, that was the best news possible, because I was happy to do the work if I knew I was going to get the results, you know?
Yeah.
And you can apply that sort of thing with a technique. You know, okay, it might take you 10,000 hours to master jiu-jitsu as a whole, and it also might take you 10,000 reps to master one technique, you know? And 10,000 reps, it's hard, but it's way more manageable than 10,000 hours. Now,
Right.
that should be a goal too if you keep track of if you kind of log your training, but you can rack out 10,000 reps in 3 or 4 months if you work hard, right? And I guarantee you something magical will happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, something changes. You're because what you're doing is you're also getting body conditioning and stuff, right? But what I was going to say about the guy, K. Anders Ericsson, when he talked about like deliberate practice, this was something that he said you needed to do in order to kind of get expert level. And he actually had like requirements of whether, you know, of what deliberate practice was, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, you had to be mentally engaged, you had to be challenged. So it couldn't be too easy. It had to be difficult, but it couldn't be too hard. Like, you had to be able to succeed if you gave it your best. If that makes sense, right? So it's kind of you got to find a sweet spot, right? And he also said, as I mentioned, you got to mentally engage, and because you got to be mentally engaged, you can only do it for like a couple of hours a day. You can't do it for like 10 hours. You can do it for like an hour, maybe an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening, where you're really, really, really honed in.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you can't train outside of that, but that's the amount of like focus you're able to put into a specific skill or one particular topic. And then of course you can do other kinds of training around that. But I would highly encourage people to first read the book Outliers. 2, if they're interested in skill acquisition, check out K. Anders Ericsson. He's got a lot of really great stuff in there about that kind of, about the skill development.
Well, I'll put a link to his work in the show description here, and then because that's definitely a big part of the show, and a lot of people have mentioned the book Outliers, but not a lot of folks have mentioned K. Anders Ericsson, the study that it was the studies that it was based off of.
So he's the and he didn't actually say the 10,000 hour rule. They kind of like, I mean, they kind of like put some words in his mouth, but it still applies basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah, I think Outliers is written by Malcolm Gladwell.
Yep.
And he writes in a narrative style.
Yep.
So he creates a narrative out of what would seem to be bland or sometimes unrelated information. He's really, really good at creating a narrative and a story where, you know, like a dry reading of something wouldn't do that. So I can definitely see how, like, Ericsson as a scientist was not interested in creating a narrative. He's just wanting to put out valid information, but then narrativizing it was something that Gladwell did.
Yeah. So what I did is you're right. So Outliers is much more accessible to a reader like me and you, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas the scientific work is not as accessible. There's some of it that you can read, but also you can look at other literature that's based off his work. So there's a bunch of other books that are based off his work that are more accessible for you to read about, right?
Yeah.
And I would encourage people to read also just about success stories. You know, people, high level athletes that have like biographies. It doesn't matter if there's not very many in jiu-jitsu. There's some good judo books that I really like. There's some good wrestling books, but any sort of book about athletic success and really probably any sort of success, because what that shows you is these people were not always good. In fact, most of them sucked in the beginning. You know, they were not good. they had lots of very, very challenging situations that they were able to overcome. So I've read like tons of these. And what I think it helped me to do and what it could help other people do is realize those people are no different than you and I. If I do the work, I will get the rewards. I will get the skill. I will get the medals, whatever you're looking for. I will get the black belt. So when you read those biographies or those stories of those tremendous athletes that we generally will put on some kind of pedestal as they're very special people, it kind of brings them down. It shows you that they're just regular people that outworked everybody, that out-believed everybody. And for me personally, that helped to motivate me. It really helped me to stay on my path and to work hard, you know?
Mm-hmm. You know, it's fascinating that you say that. We had a really famous strength and conditioning coach recently on the show named Dan John.
Mm-hmm.
And he was at the U.S. Olympic Training Center. He was a thrower. And he ultimately, I don't think, made the Olympic team.
Did you like discus or like hammer throw or javelin?
Discus and the hammer. Yes, both. He threw both of those. And then later, caber toss and a couple of the Highland games.
Oh yeah, caber
throwing.
toss is the big tree thing.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So one of the things that they did at the Olympic Training Center was they took all of these, potential soon-to-be Olympians, and they got them in a room together, and they said, we want you to write out the worst thing that's ever happened to you from an athletic standpoint, the worst athletic failure of your life. So so then tell us the second worst. Okay. So they all had to do two really terrible things that had happened to them in their athletic career that they were ashamed of, embarrassed by, just really, just sticks in your craw bad, And then they said, now let's turn the page and let's write what is the accomplishment, the athletic accomplishment that you were most proud of, and then the second most. And then they said, let's take these and ask ourselves, are they in any way connected to these failures, these embarrassing failures? And almost to a number, the most embarrassing, worst thing that had ever happened was linearly connected to the moment that they were most proud of, their biggest win, their biggest accomplishment, whatever, because they were driven by this embarrassment, this hurt, this hunger that came from failure, maybe even failure in front of people. And one of the really exciting elements of jiu-jitsu is that we get to touch that every single day. I can't tell you how many times I've gone home pissed off, mad, just embarrassed of myself, angry that I screwed up and I had a chance here and I screwed that up. And this is like in the training room. I'm not even talking about competition. Like that's a whole other level. But jiu-jitsu gives us the chance to face failure frequently. And it turns out that doing that is not only a valuable life skill, because I don't know if you've done much in business, but business is basically a continual, moving forward from small failures. Like you're always trying to keep yourself in business, and the whole world is always trying to take you out of business. But in our athletic, career, that same scenario applies. The things that really motivate us often are our failures and our screw ups. And so I liked what you said about, reading biographies of people, because it does that tracks with that, same experience that Dan John told us about.
Yeah. I think it's one way that you can, people always say you should learn from other people's experiences. That's easier said than done. You know what I mean? Like I had good parents and they gave me a lot of great advice. I didn't listen to any of it. You know what I mean? And I wish I would have. Because you know what? I mean, like most people, you think you got it figured out and you got to do it your own way. And then you have those heartbreaks and you have those setbacks. And then you remember what they told you 10 years ago. And then you do that. Oh, shit, it worked. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think that is one way that we can, learn from other people's experiences, even though we still need to have our own personal failures. When we have those failures, we can look to other people for motivation. We can look to them for some relation, as in like, you know what, I failed, they failed. Actually, I'm still on track. I'm not off track.
Yeah. Yeah. It that very much can help that personal acceptance and willingness to fail and then, get back up and throw your gi back on after you've washed it, of course, and your belt. Wash your belt, you freaks. But I think that's to me that's one of the biggest concepts that I missed when I was young, is that if I wasn't good at something within a couple of weeks, I quit doing it. And jiu-jitsu has kind of been one of the few things in my life where I just accepted that I wasn't very good at it, and I was just going to keep doing it anyway.
Well, I mean, man, I I got into a huge argument with a girl, and I basically walked out of a date because of it. But we were talking about like.
Was this like a third date, or was this a first date, or?
This was a second date from this app called Bumble, right?
Okay.
Lots of people know this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there were other reasons that I walked out, but this was a little bit of it, right? Anyways, we were talking about, first of all, she told me she was a life coach, and she's like 30, and I'm like, come on, you know what I mean? Anyways.
Yeah, life coach on OnlyFans.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But we got into this argument about fixed mindset versus growth mindset, right? And what I believe and what I was trying to tell her is, I understand that there are two theories that exist in the world, fixed and growth. However, what I believe, there's only one that exists in reality, and that's the growth. Humans are not fixed. They are growth. A baby is born learn that they know nothing. Everything you know now is based on a growth system. So I understand that there are two theories, fixed and growth. But there's only one that really exists in the world and in reality, and that's growth. And I think people really, really, really need to understand that for their own success. And I got into this with her. I was like, man, I can't exist in a world where my abilities are fixed. I mean, I can't. I mean, I could not exist happily in a world where I was in a little box that I could never get out of. I couldn't do that. I would just go insane and I would just end it, So I think understanding this idea of a growth mindset is so incredibly important for succeeding in jiu-jitsu. Just because you can't do something now doesn't mean that you can't do it later. And your future results are not based on your past failures, right? That sounds like some dumb life coach shit, but like, that's true. You know what I mean? Like, everybody can change, I understand that some people, they come into jiu-jitsu and they're very athletic, and so they can beat up people who aren't skilled. But that's, that's not really much, you know what I mean? Once they get into the real meat of jiu-jitsu and they start going against people who are skilled, things get neutralized and things kind of even out, But if you're the kind of person that comes in and you think that you can't learn, I mean, it's just going to be infinitely hard, and I think you'll end up getting chewed up and spit out. Not you personally, but just people in general. You have to believe that regardless of where I am right now, I do not have to be there in 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, whatever. You know what I mean? Everybody can grow and get better. And I mean, I can tell you as an instructor, I've been training over 20 years. I've been teaching over 15 years, and I have seen some miraculous, I mean, literally miracles happen on the mat as far as what people are capable of when they walk in the door, and then what they're capable of 5 years, 10 years down the road. You know what I mean? Like there's been people come in, and I'm like, not gonna happen. Like this guy is not gonna get it. I'm not gonna tell him that, but I can just he's gonna quit because he's never gonna get it. And then you turn around 5 years later or 3 years, whatever, several years later, and he's got it. He looks like a whole new different person. You know what I mean? And not only is his technique better, his diet's better, his energy is better, he's more social. You know what I mean? He's really changed as a person. And so I think that's important for people to realize that it's all about the growth mindset,
Are you sure you're not the life coach?
I'm not the life coach. No way. No way. He wasn't having it, by the way. She was not having it. Because that screws up her whole thing.
I think it's difficult as a life coach to make much money if you believe in a fixed mindset, because what's the point of having you if nothing can really change?
That's why she got super pissed. I brought that exact same thing up. I said, if you had a client that they worked really hard and they had some sort of fixed mindset and they got second in the competition, they lost to somebody who's better than them. Their mindset is fixed, which means they can't get any better. How do you coach them to win? She said, well, I would tell them to go to a different competition. And I'm like, that's not fixing the problem. Like a true champion, even if they went to a new competition and won, they would still know that other person that was in the other competition is out there and is better than them. You know what I mean? And she was like all frazzled, and it was funny. Kind of a dick move, I guess.
Oh yeah, you're not gonna go home with that one after that conversation. Come on, bro.
No, I just left. I paid the tab and I just
left. That's funny. Dating advice from the mats. But what's important to me, in what you've said, and I think it's all extremely valid. Is like, and I hate to use another, term out of a book or something, but when you're not good at something, especially for a long time in the beginning of jiu-jitsu, you have like this unconscious incompetent. You don't even know how bad you are.
Yeah.
And you see this, I think Chewy uses the metaphor of like a car, like you got a gear shift, and when you first start, you're in first gear, and you can like the motor is just revving and whining, like you're just giving it all you got, and you're going like 10 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And as you develop more and more skill, what's really happening is you're moving up in gears and efficiency. And so by a certain level of mastery, we'll say like maybe black belt, you're in fifth gear, the motor's just kind of purring, like you're doing like 2,000 RPMs, but you're doing like 80 miles an hour down the road. Yeah. And so in the beginning, you can't even conceptualize of what it feels like to do 80, but even if you could, you would be like, my motor would have to be exploding if I was doing that, because you can only sense first gear. Yeah. As you get more gears, that situation changes, and you open yourself to a new like potential. It's not even like maybe there is an engine that can wind fast enough to take you 80 miles an hour in first gear, but it's going to have to wind crazy. Yeah, it's going to have to be like that, or like maybe a Formula One.
No, that's a really good analogy. That's like spot on. That's really good.
So once again, like for me, because I'm an emotional person and I'm a competitive person, I've never liked losing. I don't like losing in the gym. I don't like losing in competition. I don't like losing at anything. And like I said, in the past, if I wasn't good at something fairly quickly, I would just kind of move on. I would change. I would go to a different competition, like your life coach friend says. Well,
let's be clear. I've done that too. You know what I mean? Like, I mean.
Oh yeah. It's not to say that like I'm admitting to a certain character flaw that I have.
Yeah.
But I think jiu-jitsu, if you want to get kind of, hoity-toity about it, can be a thing that teaches us the life lesson that it's okay to be bad at something and keep doing it. Eventually you get so much better than you could conceive of yourself even ever being. Like to take, once again, my example, I'm a dope of a purple belt, but like if I met myself the day I came in, there's no way that white belt me could conceive of the skill that I have acquired. It just wouldn't even make sense. You know what I mean? So I'm definitely with you. I think I probably would have made her pay the tab. Like I would have been like, I got to go to the bathroom, and then just, like whatever. If you're on Bumble, you're no gentleman. I guess that's like the Tinder for girls, right? That's the one where they swipe right and they have to reach out to you.
They're all ridiculous. You know what I mean? They're all ridiculous. But no, you know what? I mean, that's 100% true. You know what you're saying about the car and the gears. That's a great analogy. And I'm sure there's some people out there that are upset that we're talking about mental stuff and not like real technical jiu-jitsu stuff. But you got to understand, this is huge. You got to have the right mindset. And I hated listening to interviews like this when I was like a blue belt and a white belt. I wanted them to be showing fancy techniques that I could use. But as I progressed, I realized that a lot of it is mental. You got to be in the zone. You have to, nobody likes losing. Like you said, you don't like losing. I don't like it either. You know what I mean? But we realize, as you mentioned earlier too, those losses, they add up to the wins. You know what I mean?
Yep, they connect.
They all connect, in a linear way, as you said. So you have to go through that stuff. That's one reason I think you make a lot of good friends through jiu-jitsu, is because it's a shared experience. It's similar to like, it's different obviously, but like, in the military, everyone has to go through basic training and it sucks. So everyone can kind of bond over that experience. And so jiu-jitsu is just like basic training that never stops. You know what I mean? So it's even worse in some ways, because it's always, you're always kind of getting grinded down. And even though you get better at jiu-jitsu, it never gets easy. It might look easy from the outside, but you're working hard all the time. You know what I mean? And again, you got to stay sharp. You got to stay engaged, and you got to keep your eye on the ball, so to speak, or you're going to get trashed by anybody that comes in and is looking to take a shot at you,
Yeah, that reminds me, I have some friends that do bicycle racing. And one of the kind of cliches for bicycle racers is from the first day you start riding until, you're winning championships, it's never any easier. You just go a lot faster.
That's right. You get used to it. You know what I mean? Like you get used to the grind and the pain and the uncomfortability. Your body gets conditioned, so you don't notice it so much, even though it's still there. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times, I think a lot of people have this. When you first start training, you get these big bruises on your arms. Like you literally get like fingerprints on your arms. But after you've been training for a couple of years, you don't get that anymore. You know what I mean? Your body gets conditioned. Like for me to get a bruise now, I have to get like soccer kicked hard somewhere. It's going to be really, really intense, or not that it doesn't hurt. My body reacts a little bit differently. I don't get those kind of bruises and stuff.
Yeah.
So you get conditioned physically and mentally, and I think that's something that conditioning is something people don't realize you get from drilling, like just static drilling. You get body conditioning, and you get kind of mini muscular development as well. So if you put in 10,000 reps on your favorite technique, you're not only getting technical development, but you're also getting all those, little stabilizer muscles, and you're building conditioning so you can squeeze longer or hold longer than somebody else because you put that time in. And that pays off big, being able to maintain grips on people,
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because going back, to the very beginning and talking about working on my butterfly guard and getting instructionals like that portion of yours for the nonstop butterfly and whatnot. Initially, I had a really I did okay, but I wasn't really great at elevating my hips for the butterfly sweep. So it was kind of like my initial butterfly sweep kind of looked like a frog kick or something dumb like that, right? Like I'm not lifting my hip and then kicking or tracing. I'm just like kicking, and it's
Yeah.
like very little elevation and then no follow up because I'm on the mat.
Yeah.
And so solo drilling just that and teaching my body how to move in concert with itself, so that I was extending my bottom leg, which was lifting my hip, and then keeping my balance so that I could track my opponent's movement and learn how to actually follow them through the sweep, as opposed to like I either get it or I don't.
Yeah,
But like
that's huge, right? Like pursuit is
yeah,
really, really big for more advanced jiu-jitsu, because people will start to scramble and try to get away. You have to be able to follow people in all scenarios, right?
yeah, and that muscular development of like those small muscles around my hip socket were
Yeah.
really what allowed that to happen, because initially that wasn't actually even strong enough to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's an element of drilling that even myself I had overlooked, but you just kind of clued me in. It's like, oh yeah, after a while it started getting really easy and even natural to elevate my hip, whereas initially it wasn't at all.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, I think one thing that I encounter a lot with beginners is they don't have good range of motion in their body. They want to try to learn these fancy techniques, but they can't bend their knees all the way. They can't touch their toes. They can't raise their arms over their head. And it's not an injury. It's just lack of use, basically, right? And they don't want to put the time in to kind of get that ability back. They want to just try to say, I can't do that. And I mean, that really hurts them. You know what I mean? And I understand some people have real injuries and you really can't do stuff, but a lot of times it's simply lack of use. So if you just start bending your knees more, raising whatever the range of motion you're trying to get,
Mm-hmm.
it'll make things so much easier. And a lot of times as an instructor, we can disguise that with drilling. We can give them a technique that requires that motion. And because they like the technique, through drilling, they'll get that motion that they don't have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's really creative. I think that's a really brilliant insight. Is that you're analyzing the student not only on their technical abilities, but like maybe what technical abilities they're missing,
Yeah.
and then giving them something that they enjoy that will help recover that thing that they've lost.
Yeah, you got to give them like a little project. You got to trick them. You know what I mean? Like you got to hide the mushroom in the meat so the kids don't see it. Or whatever. You got to hide the broccoli in the whatever.
I think that's a really creative way of looking at it, and I definitely have to think about some of that, for my own training and stuff. I think that's one thing that I can definitely say. So my occupation requires that I sit a lot, and that basically made my hips a little bit closed and difficult, like hip extension, and like the simple act of windshield wipering was tough for me initially. Yeah. And so my instructor was like, hey man, you gotta do that. Like it's just not a thing. That's not a thing that you can make the excuse for and say, well, I sit a lot. It's like, well, no, when you get done and get off work, do your split squats and whatnot. That'll help open up your hips. Let your warm up every single workout have some of that in it. And then do your windshield wipers. Why? Because you need to open your hips more. And over the time, like that became, once again, I'm not that great, but like a big part of my pressure passing is windshield wipering and like what I would call almost sprawl type movements, which initially were very, very difficult for me, but hours and hours of practicing them gave me that range of motion to where I could use that. Not only do I have it, but I could use it as an offensive part of my toolkit.
Yeah, that's huge, and like in terms of regaining some range of motion, like the good news is, for instance, if so, you said you sit 8 hours a day.
That's more like
You don't
14.
have to. Okay, so you say you sit 14 hours a day.
Yeah.
The good news is you don't have to do another 14 hours of rehab to correct that. You got to do like half an hour. You know what I mean? So, I mean, that's really good news for people, you know, because I mean, a lot of people are sitting, especially now, people aren't going to work the same way they used to. And so you got to latch onto that good news. You know what I mean? Like, you can take maybe if we're working from home, you can take a break every hour and stretch for 10 minutes or just get up and walk around. And one thing that kind of goes along with that is when we're doing jiu-jitsu, you got to look at things in the long term. You know what I mean? You can't look at things in the short term. You have to look at things in the long term. If you do something for 3 minutes a day, every day for 10 years, and someone else is not doing that, by the time you get to 10 years, you are going to blow them out of the water at whatever it is that we're talking about here. You know, one thing that I would make people do, a couple of things in our classes is like, so we'll have some competition classes a couple of times a week, right? And like most jiu-jitsu schools, we're a little bit limited in our mat space. We can't always do a lot of takedown stuff. We actually do more than a lot of schools, but still maybe not as much as we should. So when we would have these competition classes, I would always make people do like gripping drills, just on your feet gripping for like 3 minutes. And then we would do takedown only for maybe 10 minutes at the end of class, right? So we're doing 10 minutes once or twice a week. It's not that much. But I can see it clearly. The people who have done that for the last 3 years, they are untouchable to the people who didn't do it. So they invested 10 or 20 minutes a week, played it out for 3 years, and now these people look like black belt judokas. Of course they're not. They've just been doing a little bit of work and it pays off.
Yeah,
So
in comparison, they're
comparison, exactly. In comparison, you know, so if like a real black belt came in, it wouldn't work like that. But
right, exactly.
People who've done nothing. So you really got to look at things in the long term. You know what I mean? So I understand that lots of people are limited in their time. In fact, everyone usually is. But if you can just do a little bit each day, or you know the days that you train, that time adds up and it pays off. You know, and you gotta see the light at the end of that tunnel. You know, it really makes a big difference.
You know, and something that you said there that really just like once again set a light bulb off for me is that you said you got to look for the good news. And I'm somebody who's always kind of looking for the bad news, you know, and part of this is
plenty of that.
You know, and that once again, that's a character flaw. I'm not like bragging about this. I'm just being honest. But to hear you saying that, like one of the things that is motivating and just lets someone have the drive to continue is to say good news is on the horizon, you know, and to get that long-term view and say, you know, maybe I'm not getting all the takedown work that I need, but I'm getting some takedown work and I'm certainly improving. You know, and from Emily Kwok and from Joel Bain, I think Marcelo Garcia has said it. What you said there about like you would do a lot of grip work.
Yeah.
Grip work, it seems to be that if you meet the person on non-neutral grounds, if you meet your opponent with an advantage, most of the time, if you're even reasonably competent, you win. And so by putting a lot of that effort into those grips initially, like maybe you're not doing the full takedown work, but you're putting a whole lot of time into gripping and setting up your takedown so that you have the advantage. I think that is part of what plays into that looking like a black belt, you know, after some time.
It goes back to something that I mentioned earlier, which is as we get older, we need to slow people down. We can't keep up with them with their speed. We need to eliminate all scrambles, right? So gripping both on your feet and on the ground will slow faster people down. Now that gives us a chance to utilize our technical advantage. You know what I mean? So not only is it something that everyone should have, it ages very, very, very well, right?
Mm-hmm.
It really helps us as we're aging on the mat. Now all of a sudden we can use our gripping to kind of neutralize positions, and then we can move forward from there. So whether it's on our feet or on the ground, top or bottom, doesn't matter. Gripping is something that's very, very important. A lot of times, just by getting a particular grip, you can completely destroy a specific technique that your opponent's going for. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And you can take it a step further, and if you start really kind of dissecting how to use position as opposed to technique to defeat techniques, to defeat your opponent's techniques, right? So a simple thing that, you know, is very kind of, you're kind of seeing the trends are kind of shifting now. So if we go back maybe over the last 5 years, maybe 5, 6, 7 years, there was a very, very high tendency for people to play open guard and for people to pass on their feet. If you look at almost all of the champions, they were passing on their feet and they were playing open guard as opposed to closed guard, right? Well, now you're seeing a shift. People are playing closed guard and people are playing passing on their knees, right? So when you play open guard, let's say De La Riva, right? De La Riva does not exist if you were on both knees. It cannot happen, right? So if you're going up against somebody that's got an amazing De La Riva, but maybe they have no spider guard, simply getting on your knees destroys their whole guard game. And you didn't have to learn any technique for that. You didn't have to learn any sort of fancy pass for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you know people are going to pass on their feet, if you can pull them into your closed guard, it's much harder because, one, you can keep them down. When they do stand, you can set up your preferred grips or knock them back down. They don't have the mobility that they want. They get slowed down. Does that make sense?
It does.
So that's something we have to think about too. Not always, like when we're presented with a technique that gives us problem, the answer isn't always to learn a new technique to counter that. We got to be smarter than that. Sometimes we simply need to use our body position, right? If you know somebody has a really great, like I said, De La Riva, passing on your knees is going to instantly shut that down. You know, if you know somebody is very good at, like what's really fashionable now is you're seeing a lot of leg locks, right? Especially no gi. Well, you can set it up when the guy's on the knees, but it's easier to set it up when the person is standing because you just slide right in, you know? So the first thing you can do to neutralize somebody who's very strong at leg locks is to get on your knees. Now you got to deal with butterfly and getting lifted, but you've lessened the opportunity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you've added a layer to your defense. Yeah,
That's right. So we got to think like that too, not just technique versus technique, but also position versus technique. And as I mentioned a minute ago, grip versus technique. You know, one thing that we see if we go back again to De La Riva, so a very, very classic way to pass De La Riva is to do the knee cut pass in the middle. This is like very, very classic. And the way people typically do it is, let's say my right leg is in the De La Riva, and that's the knee that I'm going to push forward. Well, typically with my right hand, I'll grab the collar. That's typically what I do. Nothing wrong with that, right?
sure.
But what you do in a way when you do that is you kind of accept the De La Riva, And now the battle is my knee cut pass versus your De La Hiva, which is not, I'm not saying that's bad, but that's what you're doing, right?
Okay.
Well, if you look at someone who I think is very innovative in this regard, Leandro Lowe, he almost never grabs the collar. He puts the right hand on the De La Hiva leg and he pushes the foot, like the leg down. So the foot that's hooked around your leg pops off. So now that De La Hiva doesn't really work. You can't lift the same way. You can't stretch the same way. So he didn't really solve the De La Hiva. He just changed the position, as we mentioned before. And now that he's got that disconnect, a lot of that De La Hiva stuff, it's just off the table. It just doesn't work anymore. Does that make sense?
It does.
So I think that's a good example of we're using position and grip to defeat a technique as opposed to another technique. And a lot of times that's easier and more efficient.
So that's setting the tactical playing field and taking it so that you're not entering on the other person's advantage. If you or I step into, one of the Meow Brothers De La Hiva guard, it's going to be a pretty long day.
Yes.
But if we make it where that's gone, now they have to shift. And I'm sure they can shift, but they have to.
But I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, their strong suit is that De La Hiva, right? That's what they want to be. Spider guard, open guard in general.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think especially like if, as we get a little bit older and things slow down, if you're setting the tactical battlefield in your advantage, then you're neutralizing if jiu-jitsu, there's a lot of ways that you could think of it, but one of the things that I think about it is that it is a systematic way of creating, maintaining, and then ultimately exploiting advantages. Setting the battlefield is one of those potential advantages. Like if we enter a place where I know you're not that great and I'm pretty good, then I have a chance. Now you're a very seasoned competitive black belt and I'm a kind of lumpy purple belt, but I still have a chance. Whereas if I enter on, in a scenario where I'm going into your A game, that's just me, like, waiting to tap basically. Like that changes the equation where maybe I have a chance to, at least push you a little bit.
Well, and we can expand upon this idea a little bit. So let's say, how long have you been training?
5 years.
5 years. Okay. Let's say, so I've been training over 20 years. Right. So what you got to realize is I haven't been training 20 years in every single jiu-jitsu position out there. Right. My experience is like the amount of time I have in different positions is varied, right? Now,
sure.
I'm going to say I'm pretty well-rounded, so I have a pretty good idea of what to do for most positions. However, there's positions I don't like. There's positions that I've never used, and all I do is get out of them, and if I get stuck there, it sucks. You know what I mean? So
what are those? Just so I can write those down.
Well, I'll tell you one. So like, I really like X guard, right? And I've when Marcelo Garcia came on the scene, and in was it 2003? He like killed everyone in Abu Dhabi, and then he put those DVDs out. I got them shits like right away, and I've been using it ever since. Drilling. I got his book. I mean, I really like the X guard, because I was able to. You really have a lot of advantage there against bigger people. You can really your whole body's underneath them.
Yep.
And they can't squish you the same way they can from butterfly sometimes. You're a bit more, the weight's off you. Anyways, I always prefer to have the leg on the shoulder, right? Some people will play like almost like a foot lock, but with the X, right? And I hate this position. And when I get there, all I try to do is change, or maybe I'll push myself back into like a butterfly or something. I just don't like it. I feel like if I do sweep from there, someone's going to suck me into a triangle or an omoplata. because like I'm kind of tall and skinny. If they catch
Yeah.
my elbow, I can get sucked in. You know what I mean? So I just really really hate it. You know what I mean? And I really, okay, one thing could be like, well, I should work better at it. I should just work that position and get better. That's true, but being good at that position is not mandatory for my success in jiu-jitsu, and it doesn't really fit in the way that it might seem like it would, right? Well, you already do this. This is the next. They're pretty different positions, actually, you know. But my point is, if you compete, you're always going to have to, at some point, you're going to have to fight and beat people that are better than you. It's just going to happen. They have more experience. They're just better, right? As a competitor, your job is still to beat them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can't just cop out and say, well, they're better than me. Can't do that, right? I mean, imagine when you get to black belt. I mean, the range of experience there is huge. You could have somebody that's been training 7 years, someone's been training 20 years, but those people have to go head to head. And I mean, as a competitor, you should be trying to win. So what I'm trying to say is that if you study people, you can find those areas where they're weak. And just because they have more experience in general does not mean they have more experience in a specific situation. And that's exactly, you see this all the time in ADCC, where really high level guys get taken down. You see it a lot with where you had, people like Gary Tonin and Gordon Ryan coming in and doing some very intricate leg lock stuff. They had less experience in general, but they had way more experience in these specific positions. The Meows, when they came out, and the Mendez brothers too, when they came out with like Barambola, they had so much experience in that position. It didn't matter how much general experience their opponent had. If they were able to get there, that was it. It was over.
Mm-hmm.
So those are examples of somebody who was less experienced beating somebody more experienced because they found an area of less. Is that too much more and less? Did I say that right?
No, I think we should throw maybe 15 or 20 more in, just, or maybe a few less. I don't know. It just depends on how you feel.
You understand what I mean?
Yes.
That experience is not evenly distributed across all your jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're going to be really, really good at your favorite guard pass and really good at your favorite guard. But sometimes when you get out of those positions, the amount of time you spent there is actually relatively small.
Right. I think that's exciting too. And that gives,
look for the good news, right?
Yeah. Once again, look for the good news and try to, become somewhat of a domain expert in a place that is, that you can get to, just like you said, half guard, omoplata, those are places that you can get to, and then have more experience in those areas than your competitors or your training partners, so that as their responses will be at a lower sort of, technical or analytical level than your responses to those responses can be, because you have more time. Yeah. That's and once again, that's good news for us all. Like, we can find those domains, and we can, if we do the work, then those domains will pay off.
Yeah. You have to also look at, you see a lot of big upsets in the Masters Worlds. You see legendary guys that are adult world champions coming in and they lose in the Masters Worlds, not necessarily to nobodies, but to people who do not have the same credentials, right? And in that case, it's not so much a physical thing as, in my opinion, it's a motivational thing, right? So you got people, I'm trying to think of somebody who lost. I think Janji Hiberio lost at one of the Masters Worlds. I think. Don't quote me on that, but I think he lost to this guy, Elliot Kelly. I think he took him down. Anyways, there's a big name like that against somebody who let's just say was not an adult world champion, right?
Yeah.
But you got to think, you have this super world champion guy. He's been training since he was like 10, competing his whole life, super, super, super hard. So now he's like this in jiu-jitsu as far as his motivation. He's way past his prime motivation to compete. Now he's competing because he likes it. He still wants to do it. It's part of his life, but it's no longer the only thing in his life, right? Well, now you have somebody else who started training when they were, let's say they were 25. They got their black belt when they're 35. Maybe they might be at the peak of their motivation. So while one guy is trying to kind of unentangle his life from jiu-jitsu, the other guy is trying to tangle it up with jiu-jitsu, right? So these are the kind of like motivational kind of mental things that I think it also causes these big upsets. I know a lot of people get discouraged about going to the Masters Worlds because they're going to come up against these legendary people. But those legendary people actually get beat on a kind of regular basis at the Masters Worlds if you really look through the results, because you have people coming in with very different motivations. You know, also, if you've won the adult worlds, is winning the Masters Worlds really that cool? I mean, it's still a feather in your cap, but I think if you had to pick out one or the other, you would pick the adult worlds. But if you've won nothing, winning the Masters Worlds, it's a pretty big deal.
Sure.
You know, like it's a big, big deal actually, right? So I think that's something you have to think about as maybe somebody who started late in the game. You actually have a motivational advantage over people, whereas people who started early, they're kind of getting burnt out, right?
You know, you're I'm just gonna like call you pretty much every day and just have you like, give me just like a quick motivational quote, and then I'll hang up and go, like look for the good news, because you've changed my opinion on, some stuff, and taken some of the things that I thought were disadvantageous and really helped me to realize that maybe they were they could be seen as advantages, if I look at them under the right lens. So I'm really appreciative of that, and I'm super appreciative of your time, and I'm really excited to be able to share this with my old roller brothers and sisters, because I think you have like some really, really amazing insights, especially for someone who maybe is having a lapse of motivation, or like this is a tough time for all of us. I'm not even trying to pretend, but
Yeah.
especially for somebody who's going through, like a similar, like a blue belt blues type scenario or something like that, which I just saw a post earlier today in a group that I'm in for seasoned grapplers. And he was, this person was saying that they didn't feel, that they deserved their belt, and, that some of the people who got the belt at the same time as him always kick his ass. And it's like, maybe I got it because I'm just the old guy on the mat who keeps showing up. And I was like, I feel pretty bad for that guy, that he's feeling that way. And I just try to say, like, trust your instructor. And sometimes you have to grow into something. Sometimes maybe you're given something because that might be the thing that inspires you to become it. Like maybe you weren't a blue belt the day you got it, but maybe your instructor felt like, if I give this to this person, it's going to be the fire under their butt that turns them into that. And I can't say that that's what happened in this case, but I can say that there's good news to be found, and our buddy Brandon the Wolverine is going to help us find it.
Well, I hope so. A lot of that comes from reading. Like it comes from my own experience, but it also comes from reading like those biographies of athletes and people who persevered. They did the same thing, and they, I mean, if you get it in your brain that you want to succeed, you got to find a way to do it. You know what I mean? And you can't be totally irrational. You know what I mean? You have to set, I mean, I hate to use the word reasonable goals, but like for example, if my goal was to play in the NBA right now, starting now, like that's not reasonable. You know what I mean? But to get a black belt, I think is pretty reasonable for everybody, and depending on when you start, you can be some kind of champion if you want to be in jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is probably the most fair playing field of any sport out there. You know, you got age, weight, belt, all this kind of stuff, gi, no gi, all this kind of stuff. So you can find a niche, and it won't be easy, but you can succeed. You know what I mean? So you can set a goal to win a state level tournament or a master's level tournament or whatever. And if you work hard, you can probably do that, you know, and that's a big deal, you know, and once you get one success, you can move on to the next one and this kind of thing. But you do got to kind of find a way to make it work, and you got to find a way to stay motivated and inspired, because again, what was the first thing I said? It's hard work. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you got to be ready for the hard work. You know what I mean? You got to have a plan for when you get depressed and you want to quit. You got to have a plan, you know, to review something about why you started. And actually, when people come in to the office and they want to quit, the easiest way to get them to reverse their decision is I just say, hey, okay, let's just talk a little bit. And they're like, and I say, do you remember why you started jiu-jitsu? Or better yet, I'll get out their like form that they filled out, and they'll put on there, you know, why did you start jiu-jitsu, or why do you want to start? And they'll circle whatever. And let's say the person circles self-defense and physical fitness. And so I said, I noticed here that you circled, you wanted to get more physically fit, and you wanted to be able to defend yourself. And they're like, yeah, definitely, but I can't do it anymore. And I said, okay, so do you no longer want to be physically fit? Like, you're just going to let yourself go and you don't care about that anymore? They're like, no, I still want to. And I said, okay. And do you no longer care about your personal safety? They're like, no, definitely, I do. And I say, then why are you quitting? What's the problem? You know what I mean? Like, I know you're having a tough time, this and that, but you still have those goals. Stay on track and keep going. You know, so everyone's got to have those same sort of motivational things when that tough time comes. You know, when you get an injury and you got to take time off and you got to come back, you got to remind yourself, hang on, I set a goal to be a black belt. I'm not there yet. I got to keep going, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think that this is probably a good place for us to pause. But you've handed down some just amazing insights, and honestly, I cannot thank you enough. Like I'm gonna have to review this one and take some notes about, you know, some of the things that the ways that I think, because I think your mindset, both as a competitor but also just as a practitioner, is a very healthy one. For someone, you know, like me, who, you know, is kind of like maybe a little bit on the negative side, to review and refresh and keep myself, you know, like thinking about those reasons of, you know, why am I doing this? And this podcast was actually a part of that. Was I want to find the ways to, you know, to be one of the ones who's left. And part of that is the mental game, and you know, that might be a part of my game that I'm not where I want to be on. So this has been a big booster and a big primer for that. So I'm really, really thankful that I got the chance to chat with you and share this with my fellow seasoned grapplers.
I hope they enjoyed it. And, you know, I think maybe we were a little bit all over the place. If you have any, you know, questions we didn't get to, or if your listeners had some questions about things I said, or if they wanted to get more into the kind of the technical jiu-jitsu talk, we'll do another one if you want to. I'm happy to do it. I like talking about it.
Well, I definitely want to have you back, and I know there's going to be some feedback and some questions, so I'm really excited about that. If somebody wants to learn, first off, what's the website that they can find your instructional with Grapple Arts? Is there a link to that?
Well, so I don't think Stefan will get mad. You can basically buy it from him, or you can buy it from me, based on how we did like the distribution and stuff. So.
Well, which way is going to get you the most money? So
yeah, if you want to, I mean, and look, if you want to, Stefan's a great guy. He's, you know, like that's just how we did it. So we kind of both like promoted on our own, you know. So if you want to get it from him, that's fine. If you want to get it from me, you can message me personally on Facebook. It's just Brandon Mullins. I got like a stupid profile picture. I'm sure. Just look at it. I'm, jiu-jitsu. You'll know it's me. You can also go to my business page. I have a small business called justgipants.com. So it's exactly what it sounds like. I just sell replacement jiu-jitsu gi pants. We got black, white, and blue. I also sell tights because that's related, and I sell replacement drawstring for your pants. We sell like the bungee cord rope, which is way better than like the cloth rope a lot of pants have. So anyways, you can go there and get your replacement gi pants, but you can also buy the DVD there. You can also access my blog there, where I talk about a lot of the stuff that we talked about in more depth. I think I have like maybe 6 or 7 articles that I wrote so far. I don't do it super often. But that's the best way to get a hold of me. Either justgipants.com, you can navigate the site, or you can find me on Facebook, send me a friend request. It generally takes me forever to accept them. If you send me a message, it goes to a different inbox. So if I don't respond, it's not because I don't like you. I forget.
Well, we'll put a link to the Just Gi Pants in the show notes and the show description.
Yeah.
I'm
also on Instagram as justgipants.com. That's
okay.
me.
So
And there's
hunt him
nobody
up.
else that works with just me. So
Hunt him up on the grams, and
yeah.
we'll get lots of people to request pics from you and stuff like that. Like for your Bumblebee profile.
Yeah. Do that. Look me up.
Well, Brandon, this has been absolutely phenomenal, and once again, I can't thank you enough. Definitely gonna ask you to commit to coming back, because you're a very insightful fella, and somebody that I can already say I've learned a lot from, and really excited to share this.
Yeah, I'd love to. I hope I wasn't rambling too much.
No, it was awesome. All right, stand by just 1 second. We'll pause the recording.
Okay.
If you made it this far, I'm betting you got a couple of good ideas out of the show. I know I did. Do a bro a favor. Hit the old subscribe button down below. Means a lot. Really helps my ratings on the old algorithms. The interwebs. And would make my mother very proud of me if I could get more and more subscribers. She likes that. So hit the subscribe button. Also share it with a friend. The ideas here have helped me, probably helped you. Maybe could help somebody else. Anybody you know that's, let's just say, seasoned, could use a little bit of extra motivation to whoop up on these 22-year-olds. Shoot it over to them. Help them out. Thanks so much. I'm having a blast doing the show, and every subscriber helps. Thanks.